President Trump had never shut down an airport before. But what happened in Alaska's skies that morning changed everything. At Anchorage International Airport, passengers were just starting their day, checking bags, getting coffee, and heading to their gates. None of them knew they were about to be part of a story that would reach all the way to the White House. Deep in Alaska's snowy wilderness, one flight was about to show just how dangerous air travel could become when things go wrong. The last flight from Alaska. It was a crisp winter morning at Ted Stevens Anchorage International Airport, the kind of morning where coffee steam danced in the cool air and passengers hurried through terminals clutching their paper cups like lifelines. At Gate 37, a Boeing 737 waited quietly. Like thousands of flights before it, this one seemed utterly ordinary. The aircraft gleamed under the morning sun, its fresh paint job making it look almost new, despite having logged over 25,000 flight hours. The ground crew moved around it with practiced efficiency, performing their routine checks with the precision of a well-rehearsed dance. What made this flight different wasn't visible to the naked eye. Hidden beneath the surface, beyond the reach of standard pre-flight inspections, something was waiting to turn this routine journey into one of the most remarkable incidents in Alaska's aviation history. The weather that morning couldn't have been more perfect for flying. Clear skies stretched endlessly above, with just a few scattered clouds painting white brushstrokes against the blue canvas. The forecast predicted smooth conditions all the way to the aircraft's destination. Sometimes, though, perfect conditions can be deceiving. As passengers filed aboard, none could have guessed that they were about to become part of a story that would change aviation safety protocols forever. They were everyday people, travelers tapping away on laptops, families heading on vacation. Each had their own reason for choosing this flight, unaware that their decision would lead them into an experience they would never forget. In the cockpit, the flight crew went through their standard procedures. The captain, a veteran with over 15,000 flight hours, and the first officer, equally experienced, worked in harmony. They reviewed weather reports, checked systems, and prepared for what should have been another routine flight from Alaska to New York. The maintenance log showed nothing unusual. The aircraft had received its scheduled checks, and everything appeared to be in perfect working order. But sometimes, even the most rigorous safety protocols can miss the smallest detail, a detail that, under the right circumstances, could cascade into something much more significant. As the engines spooled up, their familiar whine echoing across the tarmac, there was no indication that this flight would be different from the thousands that had departed Newark before it. The ground crew gave their final signals, the pushback was smooth, and the aircraft began its taxi toward the runway. The morning sun cast long shadows across the taxiway as the plane made its way to the departure point. Other aircraft moved around it in the carefully choreographed dance of airport traffic. Air traffic control cleared them for takeoff, their voice crackling through the radio with the same routine professionalism they showed for every departure. The takeoff roll began normally, the engines responding with their usual power. As the aircraft lifted off from runway 4 left, banking gently over the Alaska mountains, nobody could have predicted what would unfold in the next 47 minutes. The plane climbed steadily through 3,000 feet, then 5,000, then 10,000, cutting through the morning air with practiced ease. As the aircraft leveled off at cruising altitude, something began to change. It started so subtly that most passengers didn't notice it at first. But in the complex systems of a modern airliner, even the smallest anomaly can be the first warning sign of something much more serious. Think about the last time you were on a plane. Did you notice every little vibration, every slight change in engine sound? Would you have recognized the difference between normal flight characteristics and the first hints of trouble? For the passengers and crew of this flight, that distinction was about to become frighteningly clear. So, what exactly was that first sign of trouble, and why did it make this veteran flight crew's blood run cold? Something wasn't right. The first indication emerged 23 minutes into the flight. A subtle vibration, barely noticeable at first, began resonating through the aircraft's starboard side. Most passengers were oblivious to the slight change by then. Most passengers had settled into their routines, some dozing off, others immersed in books or tablets. However, for those seated near the right wing, something felt different about this particular tremor. High above the Alaskan mountains, the vibration slowly intensified. It wasn't the usual turbulence that frequent flyers had grown accustomed to. This sensation had a distinct rhythm, a mechanical pulse that seemed to whisper through the airframe. In the cockpit, initial instrument readings showed minor fluctuations in the right engine's performance metrics. Nothing alarming yet, but enough to warrant closer monitoring. The flight data recorder later revealed that the engine's internal temperature had begun climbing at a rate of 2 degrees per minute, slow enough to avoid triggering immediate alarms but fast enough to catch the attention of the experienced flight crew. The pilots monitored their instruments with growing concern, noticing subtle discrepancies in the engine pressure ratio readings. After a few minutes, the vibration pattern changed. What started as a gentle tremor had evolved into a more pronounced shudder. The right engine's power output began fluctuating, causing minor but noticeable speed variations. In the passenger cabin, drinks rippled gently in their cups and window shades rattled with increasing intensity. The cockpit warning system remained surprisingly quiet. Modern aircraft are equipped with sophisticated diagnostic systems designed to detect and alert crews to potential problems. Yet somehow, this particular issue seemed to exist in a gray area, serious enough to be concerning, but not severe enough to trigger automated warnings. It was the kind of situation that highlighted the irreplaceable value of human experience and intuition. Flight attendants noticed it too. Their trained eyes picked up subtle signs that something was amiss. The normal hum of the aircraft had acquired an unusual undertone, a discordant note in the otherwise familiar symphony of flight sounds. They exchanged knowing glances, their years of experience telling them that this wasn't typical turbulence. Onboard computers began logging irregular data patterns. The right engine's fuel flow showed microscopic fluctuations, deviating from normal parameters by fractions of a percent. These deviations, while minor, painted a picture of growing mechanical stress. The engine's internal components were experiencing forces they weren't designed to handle, though the full extent of the problem remained hidden. The aircraft's position over the mountains added another layer of complexity to the situation. Standard procedure for engine anomalies typically involved a precautionary descent to lower altitudes. However, over-mountain operations require maintaining sufficient altitude for safety. The flight crew found themselves balancing these competing priorities, all while monitoring the steadily deteriorating engine performance. Radio communications with air traffic control remained routine, but the crew had already begun discussing contingency plans. Their training emphasized the importance of staying ahead of the situation and preparing for multiple scenarios while managing the immediate challenges. The right engine's behavior suggested that time might be a critical factor, though none could have predicted just how critical it would become. Weather conditions remained favorable, a small mercy given the circumstances. Clear skies provided excellent visibility, and the winds remained light to moderate. But even these benign conditions couldn't mask the growing sense that something significant was developing. The vibration had become a constant presence, a persistent reminder that this flight had departed from the realm of routine operations. As the aircraft passed the 30-minute mark of its journey, the situation reached a turning point. The subtle warnings and minor anomalies were about to converge into something far more serious. The right engine's irregular behavior had evolved beyond simple vibration, setting the stage for what would become one of the most challenging moments in Alaska aviation history. The morning sun cast long shadows across the aircraft's wings, and in those shadows, something was about to change dramatically. The flight crew's decades of combined experience had taught them to trust their instincts, and those instincts were now screaming that they were about to face a situation unlike anything in their training. What happened next would test the limits of both human capability and aircraft design, transforming an unusual situation into something that would be studied in flight schools for years to come. At 36,000 feet above ground, the true nature of their predicament was about to reveal itself in a way that none of the 178 souls on board could have anticipated. The serenity of the morning flight shattered with a sound that cut through the cabin like a thunderclap. The right engine's cowling, a crucial protective cover weighing more than 200 pounds, began to peel away from the aircraft's wing. The metal groaned and twisted, fighting against forces it was never designed to withstand. In an instant, the subtle vibrations transformed into a full-blown mechanical crisis. The sight stunned passengers on the right side of the aircraft. The exposed engine components, now visible through the gap where the cowling had partially detached, created a terrifying spectacle. The morning sun glinted off metal that should never have seen daylight, casting eerie shadows across the wing's surface. The engine itself began to shake with increased intensity, its movements now clearly visible to even the most casual observer. At that altitude, the air temperature hovered around -55 degrees Fahrenheit, subjecting the compromised engine to extreme conditions. The partially detached cowling created aerodynamic disruptions that rippled through the entire airframe. These disruptions generated new vibration patterns, each one threatening to further compromise the engine's structural integrity. Flight data recorders captured the rapid cascade of events. The engine's power output fluctuated wildly, swinging between 85 and 97% of normal thrust. Each fluctuation sent shudders through the airframe that passengers could feel in their seats. The aircraft's automated systems struggled to compensate for the sudden changes in thrust, working overtime to maintain stable flight. The cockpit erupted with warning indicators. Yellow caution lights illuminated across the instrument panel, accompanied by the urgent chime of multiple system alerts. The flight crew faced an overwhelming amount of information, all while managing an aircraft that grew increasingly difficult to control. Their training emphasized the importance of remaining calm, but this situation tested the limits of their experience. The compromised engine continued operating, though each rotation of its massive turbine blades threatened to cause further damage. The missing cowling exposed sensitive components to direct airflow, creating conditions that the engine was never designed to handle. The ambient noise in the cabin increased dramatically as the disturbed airflow created a deep, pulsating roar that penetrated even the aircraft's sophisticated sound insulation. Air temperature sensors around the damaged engine began reporting anomalous readings. The exposed components, usually protected by the cowling's careful aerodynamic design, now faced the full brunt of high-altitude conditions. Warning systems designed to monitor engine temperature became confused by the conflicting data, adding another layer of complexity to an already challenging situation. The flight crew initiated emergency procedures, working through their checklists with practiced precision despite the chaos unfolding around them. Each decision they made would have lasting consequences, and time was not on their side. The damaged engine continued to operate, but its condition deteriorated with each passing minute. The choice between shutting it down completely or attempting to manage its failing state loomed large in their minds. Ground-based radar tracked the aircraft's position as it began a gradual turn back toward the coast. The turn itself presented new challenges, as the aerodynamic forces acting on the damaged engine changed with the aircraft's orientation. The partial loss of the cowling affected the plane's handling characteristics in ways that no simulator could have prepared them for. The aircraft's position relative to emergency landing sites became a critical factor. The vast Alaskan wilderness stretched below them, with airports few and far between. Fairbanks International Airport was too distant, and numerous smaller airfields dotted the landscape, but many were ill-equipped for an emergency of this magnitude. The crew faced a daunting decision: attempt a landing at one of the closer regional airports with limited emergency facilities, or try to make it back to Anchorage, where a full emergency response team waited. In the harsh Alaskan terrain, where weather conditions could change in minutes and temperatures dropped well below freezing, choosing the wrong airport could be disastrous. Fuel calculations took on new importance as the damaged engine's efficiency plummeted. What started as a routine flight with standard fuel reserves now became an exercise in resource management. The crew needed to account for the increased fuel burn caused by the compromised aerodynamics while maintaining enough reserves for potential diversions or holding patterns. The flight data recorder continued logging unprecedented combinations of system alerts and sensor readings. The unique nature of the failure meant that some of the aircraft's automated systems began operating in ways their designers had never anticipated. The interaction between these systems and the crew's attempts to stabilize the situation would later become a focal point of the investigation. As the aircraft maintained its position above the Alaska Range, the situation reached a critical juncture. The partially detached cowling threatened to separate completely, potentially causing catastrophic damage to other parts of the aircraft. The vibrations had reached an intensity that made normal cockpit operations challenging, and the crew knew that their window for decisive action was rapidly closing. The morning sun now cast long shadows across the damaged engine. What began as a subtle vibration had evolved into one of the most significant in-flight emergencies in recent aviation history. The next few minutes would determine not only the fate of this flight but also influence the future of aviation safety regulations. Fighting against time. Time became a precious commodity at 36,000 feet. With each passing second, the flight crew battled against a complex web of challenges. The decision to begin an emergency descent came after careful calculation. The aircraft needed to reach a lower altitude where the air was dense enough to provide better control, yet high enough to maintain safe clearance over the terrain. The descent itself brought new complications. As the aircraft began its controlled drop through the atmosphere, the damaged engine responded erratically to power adjustments. The missing cowling created unpredictable airflow patterns that affected the plane's handling in ways the crew had never experienced. The autopilot, confused by the unusual aerodynamic conditions, had to be disengaged, leaving the pilots to hand-fly the aircraft through its descent. Weather patterns that seemed insignificant at cruise altitude now took on new importance. Patches of moderate turbulence lay between their current position and their intended flight path. Each pocket of rough air threatened to further stress the compromised engine. The crew had to carefully thread their way through the sky, using weather radar to identify and avoid areas of potential atmospheric disturbance. The aircraft's sophisticated flight management system began displaying a series of caution messages. The combination of rapid descent and asymmetric thrust created conditions that pushed several systems close to their operational limits. Warning lights flickered across the instrument panel as various aircraft systems struggled to adapt to the unusual flight profile. Radio communications intensified as air traffic controllers cleared a path through some of the busiest airspace in the world. The area's complex network of flight corridors had to be quickly reorganized to accommodate an aircraft in distress. Other flights were diverted, creating a protective bubble of clear airspace around the troubled aircraft. The engine's condition continued to worsen. Metal fatigue indicators, designed to warn of structural stress, began showing alarming readings. The partially detached cowling had created a cascade of mechanical issues that spread through the engine's systems like a virus. Each minute of continued operation risked further damage, yet the engine's remaining thrust was crucial for maintaining controlled flight. Fuel management became increasingly critical. The damaged engine's efficiency had dropped dramatically, consuming far more fuel than normal while producing less thrust. The flight crew constantly recalculated their fuel reserves, knowing that every minute spent in the air depleted their safety margin. The nearest suitable airport was now 23 minutes away, an eternity in an emergency situation. The aircraft's descent path took it through layers of varying air density. Each transition affected the already compromised aerodynamics around the damaged engine. The flight crew had to constantly adjust their control inputs, fighting against forces that threatened to push the aircraft off its intended course. Their hands moved across the controls with practiced precision, making hundreds of tiny corrections to maintain stable flight. Emergency response teams along the Alaska mountains were mobilized. Fire stations at 3 different airports prepared for potential scenarios, not knowing which facility would ultimately receive the troubled aircraft. Medical teams were placed on standby, ready to respond to any situation that might develop during the landing attempt. The flight management computer continuously recalculated the aircraft's performance capabilities. The complex algorithms, designed to predict the plane's behavior under normal conditions, struggled to account for the aerodynamic anomalies created by the damaged engine. The crew had to rely increasingly on their training and experience rather than automated systems. As they descended through 15,000 feet, the thicker air brought both benefits and challenges. The increased air density provided better control authority, but it also meant greater stress on the damaged engine components. The sound of rushing air around the compromised cowling grew louder, creating a distinctive howl that penetrated the cabin. The flight crew worked through their emergency checklists with methodical precision, preparing for multiple possible scenarios. Each item they completed was a small victory in their battle against time, but the rapidly evolving situation meant they had to stay ahead of potential complications. They knew from their training that the most critical phase of flight still lay ahead. Calculations for their approach began taking shape. The damaged engine's reduced thrust capability meant they needed a longer runway than normal. Wind conditions at different altitudes affected their descent planning, forcing constant adjustments to their trajectory. The crew had to balance the need for a swift resolution against the importance of maintaining a stable, controlled flight path. The snow-covered peaks of Alaska grew larger in their view as they descended through 10,000 feet. The dim winter light revealed the full extent of the damage, with ice forming around the exposed engine components. The vast wilderness below offered no comfort, endless white plains and frozen forests stretched as far as the eye could see. What had started as a routine flight over America's last frontier had transformed into an aviation crisis that would not only be studied for years to come but would soon capture the attention of the president himself. The next phase would require all of their skill and experience, as they prepared to attempt something few pilots had ever faced, landing a commercial aircraft with severely compromised engine cowling and uncertain control characteristics. The true test of their training and abilities was about to begin, as they entered the most critical phase of their emergency. The critical descent. The final approach into Anchorage International Airport came far earlier than anyone had planned. The aircraft never made it anywhere near its intended cross-country destination. The decision would ultimately save everyone on board. The flight crew configured the aircraft for an emergency landing in Alaska's harsh winter conditions, managing their speed precisely through the bitter cold. Too fast would stress the damaged engine further, too slow risked ice buildup on the wings. Air traffic controllers cleared all traffic from Anchorage's airspace, creating an emergency corridor for the troubled aircraft that had barely begun its intended journey. Emergency vehicles lined the snow-covered runway, their lights piercing through the dim winter morning. Search and rescue teams positioned themselves strategically, knowing that in Alaska's unforgiving climate, every second of response time mattered. The landing gear deployment in sub-zero temperatures brought new concerns. The additional drag created by the extended gear, combined with the fierce Alaskan winds, made the aircraft increasingly difficult to control. They were attempting this landing just a fraction into their intended flight path, but it was their only option. The plane rolled slightly to the right, requiring constant corrections from the flight crew. As they descended through 1,000 feet, the crew relied heavily on their instruments. The runway lights barely visible through the swirling snow provided crucial guidance. Though they were thousands of miles short of their destination, they knew returning to Anchorage was their only chance for survival. The actual touchdown demanded incredible skill in the treacherous conditions. The flight crew executed a perfect landing despite the odds, bringing the massive aircraft down with remarkable precision on the icy runway. They had only been in the air for 47 minutes, but those minutes felt like an eternity. President Trump's response was immediate and unprecedented. Within hours of the incident, he ordered a complete shutdown of the airport. "What happened in Alaska is unacceptable," he declared in an emergency press briefing. "But thank God they made the decision to turn back. Those pilots saved hundreds of lives today, and we're going to make sure this never happens again." The investigation that followed took on national significance. Teams of engineers, safety experts, and aviation specialists worked around the clock, and their findings were reported directly to the White House. The partially detached engine cowling revealed critical weaknesses in cold weather operations, problems that had gone unnoticed during routine inspections. The president's involvement accelerated the response from federal agencies. "If that plane had continued its journey, we might be telling a very different story today," Trump stated firmly. New inspection protocols were rapidly developed, with a special focus on aircraft operating in extreme weather conditions. The incident sparked a broader debate about aviation safety in America's most challenging environments. The president's administration pushed for comprehensive reviews of all major airports in extreme climate zones. "We're going to have the safest airports in the world," he insisted. "What happened in Alaska is going to make every airport in America safer." The story of that aborted flight became more than just another aviation incident. The quick decision to return to Anchorage, though disappointing for passengers bound for the East Coast, proved to be the difference between a close call and what could have been a catastrophic tragedy. As winter settled over Alaska, the airport reopened with newly implemented safety measures, setting a new standard for cold weather aviation operations. The incident proved that sometimes the bravest decision a flight crew can make is to turn back, even if it means never reaching their intended destination. The next time you board a flight, take a moment to appreciate the incredible system of safety and skill that keeps us soaring through the skies. This Alaska incident didn't just change aviation, it showed us how challenges can transform into opportunities for growth and improvement. Every flight today is safer because of lessons learned thousands of feet above the stunning mountains. Enjoyed this journey through aviation history? Hit that like button and subscribe to explore more fascinating stories that changed the way we fly. Let's keep reaching for the skies together.